Hello and welcome to the Pelvic Floor Connection, the podcast that lifts the lid on the mysterious and misunderstood matters of all things pelvic floor and core health, helping you to better connect with the power of your pelvic floor. With me, Sarahjane West-Watson. Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Pelvic Floor Connection, and today we are asking the big question, why do I leak when I run? This is so common, and today we're really going to unpick why so many women complain of leakage or feeling heavy when they're running. And this is just something that I think is so important because running is such an in-trend sport. It's free, it's accessible to pretty much everybody. So this is a real contentious issue. Is it doing me any damage? Why is it happening to me, and ultimately what we can do about it. So if you want to answer those questions, hang around and understand what is going on in your pelvic floor when you're running and what you can do to better support it. So let's look into the stats. Why does leaking affect so many people? How many people does it affect? A phenomenal amount, and it's really hard to get a definitive answer on this, but we're looking at about 1 in 3 women suffer from some form of pelvic floor issues. In our 20s to 30s, it's looking at about 20%. Around 20 to 25% of women in their 20s and 30s experience pelvic floor issues, and that increases as we age, up to kind of 60, 70% beyond menopause. Now, I think it's really important that we understand a little bit here between stress incontinence and urge incontinence, because it's stress incontinence when the pelvic floor is stressed with pressure or load that is happening in running. And those stats and this occurrence of pelvic floor issues in running means that for many people, and for certain populations, so I'm talking here about often postnatal women and midlife women, it's perceived as a little bit normal that we get a bit leaky when we run. And I think that just because it's happening more in our society and it is becoming more normalized, doesn't mean that it's right. And doesn't mean that there's nothing that we can do about it, and it doesn't mean that there's nothing that you can't do about it and that we can't try and reduce those leaks when it's happened. And there's loads that we can do on this kind of tactical, kind of real life everyday level, and also on a bigger picture level to try and reduce it. Okay, so why are we actually leaking? What is going on? Well, most people think that they leak because their pelvic floor just isn't there anymore. There's no muscle, the muscles aren't coming to the party, or the muscles are just too weak. And that often is part of the story. But most often there's a couple of other things that are going on. So often hypertonicity, hypertone, too much tone in the pelvic floor can be a real issue. And I want you to think of it here that we've got tissue that is so tight, it actually becomes slightly ineffective. And I've done loads of podcast episodes, earlier episodes, which I'll link in the show notes, on overgripping. And actually when we overgrip, it reduces the ability of the pelvic floor to support and soften and to close underneath of us. So definitely have a little link and a listen to those episodes if you can really relate to this feeling of I'm just holding tight all the time, especially if you're going, well, aren't you supposed to do that? No, we're not. So, number 1, overgripping. That can be a reason for pelvic floor leakage and incontinence when you're running. Number 2, this is really common, is so many women activate the wrong muscles. And it's like, well, how do you do that? Well, actually, because not many people are educated where the pelvic floor is and what it feels like to actually get that muscle working. And so often we kind of get this gripping around the rib cage and sort of in the belly when we're trying to get the pelvic floor activated. And that is not the right muscle activation. In fact, what that does is that places more pressure. It's like we're squeezing above our pelvis area and our pelvic organs, which can actually place more strain on the pelvic floor and more load. So that is our second big reason, is we're often activating the wrong muscles, which inadvertently put more pressure, like squeezing from the top of a balloon down onto our pelvic floor, which doesn't help. And then the other key reason why we are not supporting our bladder enough is that we don't have the correct coordination of our deep core. And that deep core is really, really important to support not only our pelvic organs, so stopping that feeling of kind of heaviness and bulging when we're running and when we're doing those impact sports, but also it allows the core to manage the pressure internally and allows a deep seat of the pelvic floor sling, the base of our pelvis, not just around the bladder, to actually activate. So that is the other massive reason that the overall core isn't kicking in when we're running, especially if you sort of go what I kind of call 0 to hero, is we're quite sedentary, but then we compensate for that sedentary day by suddenly jumping up and saying, right, I'm going to go for a run here. And it's like the pelvic floor has gone from not having to do anything and being told that you can just have a little rest here all day, to suddenly needing to hold all of your pelvic organs, all of your abdominal contents, whilst you go and pelt out your day's grr along the road. And it's getting this very mixed message, and it's not great at suddenly go from being inactive to suddenly having this high demand placed on it. There's also the tactical issues that is going on. And what I mean by tactical issues, these are like the small factors that really can make a big difference. So things like caffeine, our hydration loading through the day. Are we suddenly going, oh God, I'm going to go for a run, so I'm going to drink loads of water the half hour before I go, which is then going to load that bladder quite excessively. The caffeine, we know, is a bladder irritant and a stimulant, so it's going to really cause the bladder to suddenly get quite active and loosen the muscle integrity in the pelvic floor, which is an effect of the caffeine. We've also then got the dietary things. So if we're eating things like our tomatoes and our spicy foods, that again can be a real bladder irritant and create a little bit more extra noise in the bladder that can be causing those issues. And then we have some funky things like time of the month. Time of the month. So looking at what your estrogen is doing also has a big impact on your pelvic floor continence. So if you are premenstrual, you are likely to struggle a little bit more with your continence than if you're post-menstrual. So I often relate to that menstrual cycle is the seasons of the year. So 1 month has all 4 seasons in it. The bleed, the start of our cycle, is that deep winter. So that's when our estrogen is at its lowest. And that's often when incontinence and more pressure and a lack of support is able to be provided and offered by the pelvic floor, because it needs a lot of estrogen. So when estrogen's low, premenstrually and menstrually, then it can really impact our ability to support our pelvic organs. So as we come out of our bleed, as we kind of come into what I call spring and then into summer, we might feel that those continence issues start to reduce. We're like, I've sorted my issues. But then as we come into our autumn, then as we become premenstrual and estrogen's declining in preparation for the bleed for deep winter, then we might start to feel symptoms of leakage. Even if we don't necessarily notice it when you're running, you might suddenly get home and think, do you know what, I'm a little bit damp. And that is because of our estrogen, and estrogen is required by those pelvic organ muscles to be really nice and supportive, and also to ease and to improve bladder function. So tactically, looking at how much demand you're placing on your bladder around the time of the month that you need most support is really important. Reducing caffeine, maybe saying, you know, I'm going to go for my run before I have any caffeine, or on run days, say we're going to really limit caffeine for a good few hours before you go for a run. Also, things like having a bowel movement, reducing the actual weight in your pelvis can be really, really supportive as well. So those are a whole host of things that can really, really affect why your pelvic floor cannot support the load of running. But let's go back and have a little look at the actual role of the pelvic floor muscles and why so many people think they're tightening but they're not getting the support that they need. And that really comes down to, I've got my friendly pelvis if you're watching over at YouTube. So that really comes down to the misnomer that the pelvic floor is a lot about the vaginal close and about closing and almost feeling like we're stopping the flow. And that is important, but not as important as this amazing sling or kind of hammock muscle of the pelvic floor, which comes all the way from the base of the tailbone out to those sit bones, so the middle of the bum cheeks, and then forwards to the pubic bone. And this really has that supportive role of lifting under our pelvic organs and, most fundamentally, supporting the diaphragm with the breath. And it's this big sling muscle that the majority of people, a majority of women, don't understand how to activate when they need it. And this is this core dysfunction that is often talked about. We really focus in today's world on pulling the abs in tight. And that pulling the abs in tight to activate the core doesn't activate our core. It just pulls the abs in tight. And as we pull the abs in tight, it increases our pressure in that whole pelvic area, which causes more continence issues. So we have to kind of reprogram, reorganize this core activation for getting this amazing sling supported from beneath, because it's that support from beneath, that rising and gentle hugging upwards of that pelvic floor sling that better supports the pelvic organs, including the bladder. And it supports the pressure from below. And so it helps to stop the leakage from the bladder. So if you're kind of going, but I feel like I'm gripping really tightly when I run, but it's not having the effect that I want, then I would really, really look at how you're engaging your core. And this is the most common thing that I see with women. They come and see me with real simple symptoms like I'm leaking when I run, and they really are over gripping, they're over exercising what they think is their pelvic floor muscles, but actually it's their abdominal wall or something around the diaphragm. It's not the actual pelvic floor deep in the pelvis. So re-educating how we're engaging that pelvic floor and how we're supporting our pelvic organs is the missing piece in this problem. And that is why I am absolutely passionate about getting women to understand exactly where their pelvic organs, their pelvic floor is. So it's not just about randomly gripping. It's not just saying cues like stop the flow. It's not just saying do those flicks and lifts and long holds, short holds, because we can tense various parts in our body. But generally women, for a whole host of different reasons, don't get deep enough into their pelvis to activate the right muscles. And that's why I have my 6-week Transform Your Core, because that is the program that gets you to really activate and wake up this sling muscle so that it absolutely understands how to come into play when it's needed in things like our walks, our runs, our jogs, our bends, our pushes, our strains and our lifts. But it also helps really support the pelvis and angle of the pelvis, which then helps to reduce the load through the back, reducing your backache. It spreads the load evenly through the pelvis and down through the femurs so that you're not overstraining your hips, that you're reducing those hip aches, and that you're really getting that nice equality around our global core muscles like our glutes, our hamstrings, which for so many women just switch off, especially if they're doing things like running as their primary go-to exercise. So learning how to really support and transform how this core is supporting you because it's activating the pelvic floor, which is literally the magic key into core activation, is critical. And I am starting my 6-week Transform Your Core and Pelvic Floor program in April. Doors haven't yet opened, but if you want to get into that program, then you just log on to fitfannyadams.com/waitlist. That will get you the early bird pricing, plus some other extra goodies, which I like to throw into April 2026's 6-week Transform Your Core, which is made up from live classes through me 3 times a week, short, really manageable, hand-held, deeply guided support. My pelvises, I've got multiple pelvises, are always on hand. We've got balloons, we've got props, we've got me supporting you on Zoom to get you to understand exactly how to activate and what muscles you need to be strengthening to get this global handoff, this lovely support in your core and pelvis, so that you can then go back to things like running without feeling that you've got no control, without feeling like you're gripping but nothing's happening. So jump onto fitfannyadams.com/waitlist if you want to sign up for that waitlist. If you're not sure if this is for you, then drop me a message, connect with me at social media at fitfannyadams. I'm not on the crazy TikTok, but I am on Instagram and Facebook, or just drop me an email through the website fitfannyadams.com. So don't give up if you think that your pelvic floor is just not happening because you leak when you run. It is so common, but because it's common, we think it's normal, and because we think it's normal, we think that we can't fix it. And that is just not the story here. It's about proper education, proper restoration of the right muscles, and integration of those right muscles into your exercise program, so that you are learning to engage your core, your pelvic floors effectively when you are doing running. So don't be one of those women that just puts up with slapping on another pad and wearing dark leggings when they run. That is not normal. I want you to feel supported. I want you to feel engaged and working with your body when you are doing all the good stuff of that exercise. I really hope that's helped unpick why you might be leaking when you run. What is your biggest thing? Are you gripping the wrong way? Are you loading up with caffeine and water before you go on your run? Are you just not understanding how your pelvic floor works? Drop me a message. I'd love to hear from you so I can get more content out to you. Please also just take a moment to hit follow or subscribe, and to drop a little star rating. It really makes such a difference. Let people know about this good work of what your pelvic floor does in the correct way, because it really does change how women live, move and breathe and feel. Thanks so much for taking the time to listen, and I cannot wait to be in your ears again soon. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and if you have, then please do take a moment to rate and review me on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast from. Help me to help make this conversation be heard and take the shame away from pelvic pain.